I was holding my mother's hand when she said the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew about myself. "You're not my son. I stole you from a billionaire family when you were only 3 months old." The heart monitor beside the bed emitted uneven beeps. The smell of hospital disinfectant mixed with the scent of impending death filled the room. My fingers trembled, but I didn't let go of her hand. I couldn't. Even though every cell in my body screamed for me to run away. "Mom, you're delirious because of the medication," I murmured, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. Her eyes, once always so kind, now carried something different. Guilt. Fear. And maybe relief? "Listen. I don't have much time, and you need to know the truth before I go." My heart pounded erratically. 38 years. 38 whole years believing I was the son of a woman who worked as a cleaner her entire life to support me. I grew up in a tiny apartment in Cleveland, where the wallpaper peeled and the heater broke every winter. I shared a room with my 2 older brothers until I was 16. Wore thrift store clothes. Ate instant noodles more times than I can count. And now she was telling me none of it was real? "I worked as a housemaid in Manhattan," she continued, each word coming with effort between labored breaths. "In a huge mansion, full of expensive paintings and crystal chandeliers. The family owned half the world, it seemed. I used to clean those enormous rooms and wonder what it would be like to have been born there, you know." I didn't know what to say. I just held her hand and let her go on. "One day, the lady of the house went out to a charity event. The baby was asleep in the crib. Beautiful. Dark hair, round cheeks. Only 3 months old." She paused, swallowing hard. Something inside me broke. I looked at that child, at that life of privilege waiting for him, and I thought, why does he deserve everything while my children deserve nothing? My stomach turned. "So I took you. Wrapped you in a blanket, put you in my big bag, and walked out the back door as if nothing had happened. I caught the first bus to Cleveland and never went back." Tears started running down my face before I even realized it. They weren't exactly tears of sadness. It was something deeper. A feeling of disintegration, as if the ground beneath my feet had disappeared and I was falling into an endless void. Who are my real parents?" She closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she'd lost consciousness, but then she whispered a name I would never forget. "Sterling Rothwell. Your father is Sterling Rothwell." Even in my simple life, far removed from the world of the rich and famous, I knew that name. Everyone did. Sterling Rothwell owned one of the largest real estate empires in the country. His buildings dominated the New York skyline. His face occasionally appeared in business magazines I saw at newsstands but never bought. And my mother? My real mother. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "She died. 2 years after I took you. Suicide." Her voice was just a thread now. I read about it in the paper. She never recovered from losing her child. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My biological mother was dead. Dead because of me. No, because of the woman lying in that bed. Why? It was all I could manage. "Why did you do it?" She opened her eyes again and looked at me. There was something strange in that look. Not just guilt. There was resentment too. Because Sterling Rothwell owed me that. Before I could ask what she meant, the door burst open. My brothers walked in. Dennis, the oldest, 42, with his beer belly. And the middle one, 40, with her usual look of disapproval. "She's still alive?" Dennis asked bluntly, glancing at the monitor. "What kind of question is that?" I snapped, still dizzy from the revelation. "A practical one," he shot back. "I need to know if I can make it to work tomorrow or if I'll have to deal with a funeral." I stared at him in disgust. I always knew Dennis was insensitive, but this was too much, even for him. The middle one approached the bed and looked at our mother without any visible emotion. "She told you." My blood ran cold. "Told me what?" "That you were stolen. That you're not really our brother." She crossed her arms. "We always knew." The world spun. "You knew." "Of course we knew," Dennis laughed bitterly. "You think Mom could hide something like that from us? I was 4 when you showed up out of nowhere. I'm not stupid." And you never told me? My voice came out louder than I intended. What for? You were useful. One more pair of hands to help with bills when you grew up. One more paycheck coming in. She shrugged. Now that she's dying, it doesn't matter anymore. I felt sick. Not just from the revelation that I'd been kidnapped, but from the coldness with which the people I'd called family my whole life were reacting. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with contained anger. Get out now. This room isn't yours, Dennis retorted. We're her real children. You're just a... Get out. My scream echoed down the hallway. A nurse appeared at the door, worried. Dennis and the middle one left, grumbling, but not before throwing looks of pure hatred my way. I was alone with her again. My mother. No, not my mother. The woman who kidnapped me. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time her voice carried true remorse. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I could give you love, even without money. But I was wrong. About everything. You destroyed lives. Mine. My real mother's. My father's. I know. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. But you need to understand something. Sterling Rothwell isn't the man you think he is. There are things you don't know yet. Things that... Her voice faltered. The monitor began to beep frantically. The nurse rushed in, followed by a doctor. I was pushed to the corner of the room while they worked on her. 3 minutes later, she was dead. And I was completely alone in the world, not knowing who I really was. The following days were a blur. The funeral was small and awkward. Dennis and the middle one barely spoke to me. When the will was read, I found out she had left nothing but debts. The apartment we grew up in was rented. There was no life insurance. Nothing. You need to leave, Dennis told me the night after the funeral. This apartment is ours now. You have no right to be here. I've lived here for 38 years. And you haven't paid rent any of those years. You were a burden. Always were. He opened the door. You've got until tomorrow morning to pack your things. I was in shock. I looked at the middle one, hoping she'd say something, anything. But she just avoided my gaze. That night, I packed my suitcase with a few things I owned. Old clothes. A few books. An old photo of me smiling at 5 years old, not knowing my whole life was a lie. The next morning, I left for the last time the only home I had ever known. I had nowhere to go. My job as an administrative assistant barely paid enough to survive, let alone rent a place. I ended up in a homeless shelter in downtown Cleveland. Weeks turned into a month. I slept on an uncomfortable bunk bed, surrounded by strangers whose lives had also fallen apart. During the day, I wandered the city, trying to process everything. Trying to decide what to do with the information I had. Should I look for Sterling Rothwell? Should I just move on and forget it all? The decision was taken from my hands. It was a Tuesday afternoon when 2 men in suits walked into the shelter asking for me. One was tall, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed able to detect lies from miles away. The other was younger, carrying an expensive leather briefcase. "We need to talk to you," the older man said. "It's about your father." My heart raced. My father is dead. No. Your father is very much alive. And he's been looking for you for 38 years. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens when I finally meet the man who might have all the answers I need. The 2 men took me to a cafe 3 blocks from the shelter. The place was simple, with worn formica tables and a lingering smell of burnt coffee. They ordered 3 cups, but I couldn't touch mine. My hands were shaking too much. "My name is Richard," the older man began. "I'm a private investigator. This is Jonathan, attorney for the Rothwell family. We've been looking for you for a long time." 38 years is a long time indeed, Jonathan added, opening his briefcase and pulling out an old photograph. It was a baby with round cheeks, dark hair, curious eyes. "This is you. Christopher Sterling Rothwell. 3 months old when you disappeared from the family mansion in May of 1985. I took the photo with trembling hands. I looked at that face and tried to see myself in it. It was impossible to tell. All babies look alike, don't they? How did you find me?" Richard leaned forward. "After your The woman who raised you died. Your brother contacted the press. Tried to sell the story for $50,000. An investigative journalist got suspicious and reached out to us. Dennis. Of course it was Dennis. He always had a special talent for turning misery into money. We ran preliminary checks, Jonathan continued. Date of birth, physical characteristics, circumstances of the disappearance. Everything matches. But we'll need a DNA test to confirm it legally. And if it really is me? What happens then? The two men exchanged a meaningful look. Richard was the one who answered. Then you meet your father. And you find out why he never stopped looking for you. 3 days later, I was in a private lab in Manhattan, letting a technician collect a saliva sample from my cheek. The process was quick and painless, but the weight of what it meant was crushing. Results in 48 hours, she said with a professional smile. 48 hours. 2 days to find out if my life had truly been a monumental lie, or if all this was just a cruel twist of fate. Jonathan took me to a hotel. It wasn't luxurious, but compared to the shelter where I had spent the last month, it felt like a palace. Private room, soft bed, hot shower. Simple things I had taken for granted all my life. That night, alone in the room, I turned on my old laptop and searched for everything about Sterling Rothwell. There were hundreds of articles. Thousands of photos. Awards, openings, charity events. An empire built on real estate and smart investments. But what caught my attention the most were the old photos. There was one in particular, from 1986, a year after my disappearance. Sterling stood beside a blonde, elegant woman at a gala event. The caption read, "Sterling Rothwell and wife Patricia attend fundraiser despite recent family tragedy." Patricia. My biological mother. I zoomed in on the photo, studying her face. She smiled for the camera, but her eyes were empty. Dead. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who was only surviving, not living. 2 years after that photo, she was dead. And according to what my kidnapper had said, it was suicide. I closed the laptop, feeling a crushing weight on my chest. My real mother had taken her own life because I disappeared. And I had grown up just a few hours away, never knowing. The 2 days dragged on like 2 years. Finally, Jonathan called me. The test is positive. You are Christopher Sterling Rothwell. Son of Sterling and Patricia Rothwell. No margin of error. I sat on the hotel bed, processing the words. So it was true. All of it was true. Your father wants to meet you. His health is delicate, but he insists on seeing you as soon as possible. Delicate. Jonathan hesitated. Terminal cancer. Stage 4. Doctors say a few months at most. Another blow. I finally find my real father, and he's dying. The Rothwell mansion was in the Upper East Side, an area of Manhattan I only knew from movies. The car passed through ornate iron gates, up a circular drive to a stone building that looked straight out of the 19th century. White columns, enormous windows, perfectly manicured gardens. It was the kind of place I used to clean, not the kind I belonged in. Jonathan guided me through a high-ceilinged entrance hall with a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than I'd earn in my entire life. We climbed a curved staircase, our footsteps muffled by an old Persian carpet. We stopped before a set of mahogany double doors. Jonathan knocked softly. "Come in," a weak voice answered. The room was enormous, yet somehow still felt suffocating. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the corner. A man lay in a large bed, surrounded by white pillows. He was thin, almost fragile, with pale skin and sunken eyes. But when he saw me, those eyes lit up with an intensity that caught me off guard. "Christopher," he whispered, and there was so much in the way he said my name. Decades of pain, hope, love. "Hi," was all I could manage. "What do you say to a father you've never met?" "Leave us," Sterling said to Jonathan, never taking his eyes off me. When the door closed, the silence in the room was almost tangible. I slowly approached the bed, not knowing what to do with my hands. "You look like your mother," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The same eyes. The same shape of the face. I'm sorry about what happened to her." Sterling closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there were tears there. "She couldn't bear it. We looked for you everywhere. Spent millions on detectives, rewards, awareness campaigns. But it was as if you had simply vanished off the face of the earth. I was in Cleveland the whole time. Just a few hours from here. Cleveland, he repeated bitterly. If only we had searched better in the nearby cities. If only, he stopped, breathing heavily. I waited for him to recover. There were so many questions I wanted to ask, but I didn't know where to start. The woman who took you, he finally said. Dorothy. Do you know who she really was? I shook my head. She mentioned something strange before she died. Said you owed her that. I didn't understand. Sterling let out a dry, humorless laugh. Then she didn't tell you everything. Typical of her, keeping secrets until the end. Tell me what? He looked me straight in the eye. Dorothy wasn't just our maid. She was my half-sister. The world stopped. What? My father had an affair with the family's maid when I was a teenager. She got pregnant, and he fired her, denying everything. The child was born. Dorothy. He took a deep breath. She grew up in poverty while I grew up here, with everything money could buy. She always knew. She always blamed us. My mind struggled to process it. So she was my aunt? Yes. And when you were born, she saw her chance for revenge. Not just to make us suffer, but to raise the Rothwell heir as her own child. I think in her twisted mind, it made sense. It was poetic justice. I felt sick. Dorothy wasn't just a kidnapper. She was family. Family who had used me as a pawn in a sick game of revenge. There were others involved, Sterling continued. Dorothy didn't act alone. We had suspicions over the years, but never any solid proof. People inside the house, people we trusted. They all betrayed us for money or twisted loyalty. Who? Some are already dead. Others disappeared. But I have names, addresses, evidence I've gathered over the decades. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. And now that you're here, we can finally get justice. Before I could respond, he had a violent coughing fit. A nurse rushed in, adjusting something on his fore. When she left, Sterling looked even more fragile. I don't have much time, he said softly. Weeks, maybe days. But you need to know something important. He gripped my hand with surprising strength. You are my only son. My only heir. Everything I've built, everything I own, will be yours when I'm gone. I don't want your money, I said automatically. It's not about what you want. It's about what's right. It's about correcting decades of injustice. His voice grew stronger, more determined. And it's about making sure those who destroyed our family pay for what they did. In the days that followed, I visited Sterling daily. He told me stories from my infancy that I didn't remember. How I laughed when he made faces. How I gripped his finger with my tiny hand. How he planned to teach me to play baseball when I got older. He also told me about Dorothy. How she had shown up at the mansion years earlier, begging for a job. How he, feeling guilty for what his father had done, hired her against everyone's advice. How she seemed to settle down, becoming part of the household staff. It was all an act, he said bitterly. She was waiting for the right moment. And when you were born, she saw her opportunity. Sterling also revealed something disturbing. Dorothy didn't stop at just one kidnapping. Over the years, she was involved in a network of illegal adoptions, stealing babies from wealthy families and selling them to the highest bidder. Some children were returned after ransom payments. Others were never found. I spent millions investigating, Sterling explained. I have files, statements, evidence. But I never had the courage to take it all to the police because I was afraid I'd never find you. I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, you'd be killed. The magnitude of Dorothy's criminal operation made me nauseous. How many other families had been destroyed? How many other children grew up not knowing who they really were? When I'm gone, Sterling said in our last lucid conversation, you'll have the resources to do what must be done. To find the other children. To bring justice. To make sure your mother's memory is honored. 2 weeks after our first meeting, Sterling Rothwell passed away. I was holding his hand, just as I had held Dorothy's. But this time, I felt true loss. The loss of a father I barely had time to know. The loss of all the years we could have had together. The funeral was immense. Hundreds of people I didn't know, all dressed in black, each with their own stories about the great Sterling Rothwell. I felt like an imposter there, the lost son who had shown up too late. At the reading of the will 3 days later, Attorney Jonathan read the words that would change my life again. I leave all my assets, properties, investments, and full control of Rothwell Enterprises to my only son, Christopher Sterling Rothwell, also known as, he hesitated, the one who was stolen from me but has finally returned. The numbers were incomprehensible. $1 billion. Properties in 12 states. Shares in dozens of companies. A fortune built over a lifetime. And now it was all mine. $1 billion. I repeated that number in my head as I sat in Sterling's office, now my office, looking out over the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 months ago, I was sleeping in a shelter. Now, I own 3 buildings with this same view. But the money meant nothing. Not yet. Not while the questions continued to haunt me every night. I sat in the leather chair where Sterling used to sit and opened the first file he had left for me. A box full of investigations, photos, statements, evidence collected over decades. The obsession of a man to find his son and dismantle the network that had stolen him. The first folder contained photos of Dorothy at different times. There was one in particular that made my blood run cold. She was in a hospital, dressed as a nurse, holding a baby. The date on the back read 1993. 8 years after she kidnapped me. I turned the photo over. On the back, Sterling had written in shaky handwriting, "See. Mary's Hospital, Boston. Baby disappeared 3 days later. Family paid $500,000 ransom. Child returned, but traumatized. Dorothy identified by witness years later, but insufficient evidence for prosecution." There were dozens of cases like this. Some with happy endings, if we could call them that. Babies returned after payment. Others with tragic endings. Children never found. Families destroyed. Lives ruined. And Dorothy was at the center of it all. Jonathan entered the office without knocking, as he had started doing in recent weeks. He had become something between a lawyer, an advisor, and the closest thing I had to a friend in this new world. "I found 3 more," he said, placing another folder on the already crowded desk. "All follow the same pattern. Wealthy families, babies disappearing from hospitals or homes between 1985 and 2000. Dorothy appears nearby in photos or employment records." I opened the new folder. 3 young faces stared back at me. Adults now, in their 20s and 30s. Living normal lives, unaware that their identities had been stolen. "How do we contact them?" I asked. "Carefully," Jonathan replied. "We can't just show up and destroy their lives with a revelation like this. We need concrete proof first. DNA tests. Birth record verifications. It's a delicate process." I spent the following nights immersed in the files. Took notes. Created timelines. Mapped connections. Sterling was right, Dorothy didn't work alone. There were names that appeared repeatedly. Doctors falsifying birth certificates. Lawyers processing illegal adoptions. Nurses granting access to hospital nurseries. It was a sophisticated operation, driven by greed and cruelty. One name in particular caught my attention. It appeared in at least 10 different cases over 15 years. A doctor named Robert Chun, who worked in various hospitals along the East Coast, always moving before suspicion could reach him. "Is he still alive?" I asked Jonathan. "Very much so. Retired now, living comfortably in a luxury condo in Miami. Paid in cash, of course." "I want to talk to him." Jonathan hesitated. "Not a good idea. If he knows we're investigating." "I'm not going to threaten him. I just want answers." 3 days later, I was knocking on Dr. Chen's apartment door. An Asian man in his 60s opened, reading glasses hanging around his neck, a confused expression on his face. "Can I help you?" "My name is Christopher Rothwell. But you may know me by another name. The baby Dorothy stole in 1985. The color drained from his face. He tried to close the door, but I placed my foot in the way. "I'm not here to threaten you. Not yet. I'm here because I want to know about the other children. How many? Where are they? What happened to them?" I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled a photo from my pocket. It was him, 20 years younger, leaving a hospital with Dorothy. This photo was taken hours before a baby disappeared from that hospital. The family is still looking for that child. You're going to tell me it's a coincidence? He looked nervously down the hall. Come in. Quickly. The apartment was exactly what I expected. Expensive furniture, modern art on the walls, ocean view. All purchased with dirty money. Look, he began, hands shaking, I didn't hurt the children. I never did anything to hurt them. You stole babies from their families. How can you say you didn't hurt them? I facilitated the adoptions. Dorothy told me they were infertile couples desperate for children. That the biological families didn't want the babies. I believed her. Lies. At first, it wasn't a lie. He shouted, then controlled himself. At first, they were legitimate adoptions. Teenage mothers who couldn't raise the children. Poor families wanting a better life for their babies. I connected these children with families who could care for them. Yes, outside legal channels, but with good intentions. And when did that change? He sank into the sofa, suddenly looking much older. When Dorothy realized how much rich people would pay. When she started targeting specific families. When it became about revenge and greed, not helping children. Why didn't you stop? Because she had proof of my involvement in the first cases. She threatened me. Said she'd report me if I didn't continue helping. He looked at me with pleading eyes. I was weak. Needed the money. My marriage was falling apart. I had gambling debts. I'm not a strong man. I felt disgusted, but also a pang of pity. This man was a coward, not a monster. Dorothy was the monster. She manipulated weak people and used them for her own ends. How many children? I'm not sure. I was involved in maybe 20 cases. But Dorothy had other people helping. Other doctors, other nurses. Could be 50. Could be 100. She was very careful. Compartmentalized everything. No one knew the full scale except her. Names. I need names of other children. Of other people involved. He shook his head. I don't have names. Dorothy never told me. I just did my part, that's it. You're lying. I'm telling the truth. He stood up, desperate. Look, I kept some records. Cases I was directly involved in. They're hidden in a storage unit. I can give you the key. It's all I have. I took the key he offered me. A small piece of metal that could open doors to dozens of destroyed families. If you're lying, if you're deceiving me in any way, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Understood. He nodded frantically. Understood. I swear it's all I have. The storage unit in Miami contained 3 dusty cardboard boxes. Inside were medical files, falsified birth certificates, photos, even payment receipts. It was a gold mine of evidence. I spent the entire night in that cold, dimly lit unit, cataloging everything. Jonathan had been right to be worried. There were far more cases than Sterling had ever documented. 23 children in which Dr. Chun was directly involved. 23 stolen lives. But what struck me the most was a diary. Apparently, Dr. Chun had enough guilt to document his crimes, perhaps as a form of confession. In it, he mentioned other accomplices. Names I could trace. I returned to New York with the boxes and a new determination. I wasn't just going to find the stolen children. I was going to dismantle the entire network. I was going to make sure every person involved paid for what they did. I hired a team. Not just lawyers, but private detectives, DNA specialists, forensic investigators. People who knew how to work discreetly. I spent millions in a few weeks, but I didn't care. Sterling's money finally had a purpose. We started with the most recent cases. 3 young adults living in different parts of the country, unaware of their true origins. We approached their biological families carefully. Conducted DNA tests. Confirmed identities. The first reunion was in Chicago. A 32-year-old woman who thought she was an only child of a middle-class couple discovered she was actually the daughter of an Italian family from Boston. Her disappearance as a baby had destroyed her older brother, who developed severe depression and never married. When they embraced in the lawyer's office, both crying, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Purpose. The feeling that Sterling's money was being used for something that truly mattered. The second case was more complicated. A 28-year-old man who discovered his identity was false. His adoptive family, who had purchased him from Dorothy without asking questions, was terrified of losing the child they had raised. His biological family was desperate to reclaim him. I made a decision then. I wouldn't force anyone. I would offer truths, resources, psychological support. But in the end, the choice would be theirs. Some victims wanted to reconnect with their biological families. Others wanted distance. I respected both. The third case broke me. A 25-year-old woman whose biological family had fallen apart after her disappearance. Her parents divorced. Her father became an alcoholic and died at 50. Her mother was in a nursing home, with advanced dementia. When I took the young woman to visit her mother, the old lady didn't recognize her. She just stared through her with empty eyes, humming a lullaby. Did she used to sing this? I asked gently. The young woman shook her head, tears streaming. I don't know. I don't remember anything before age 3. But then something extraordinary happened. The mother took her daughter's hand and continued singing, her voice clearer now. And the young woman began singing along, the words returning from some deep place in her memory. In that moment, in a nursing home room somewhere in Connecticut, two people who had been stolen from each other found connection again. It wasn't a completely happy ending. But it was something. With every case I solved, with every family I reunited, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. But I also knew there was much more work ahead. Dr. Chen's files mentioned at least 15 other cases I hadn't yet investigated. And those were only the ones he knew about. How many more had Dorothy hidden over the years? One night, alone in the office, I looked at the photos of the families I had helped reunite. Smiling faces, hugs, tears of joy. This was what Sterling had fought for all those years. This was what he wanted me to do with his fortune. But there was one last thing I needed to do. Something I had been avoiding because it was too personal. I needed to confront Dennis and my other sister. The people who had known all along that I had been stolen and never said a word. The people who treated me like a burden and threw me out as soon as Dorothy died. I picked up the phone and dialed Dennis's number. He answered on the third ring. Who is this? It's me. We need to talk. There was a long pause. About what? You've already gotten what you wanted. Became rich. Happy now. Actually, I'm far from happy. But this isn't about me. It's about justice. And you're going to help me get it, whether you like it or not. Dennis showed up at my office 3 days later, wearing the same worn-out coat I remembered him wearing when we lived together. My middle sister came with him, arms crossed defensively even before stepping through the door. Nice place, Dennis said sarcastically, looking around Sterling's office. Must be nice to steal someone else's fortune. Steal. I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. That's interesting coming from you. Sit. They reluctantly sat in the leather chairs across from my desk. I opened a folder and pushed it toward them. Recognize these photos? Dennis looked and went pale. They were old photos of Dorothy with different babies. Photos I had found in Dr. Chen's files, some that even Sterling didn't know about. So what? He tried to sound indifferent, but his voice trembled. So what? I repeated. Dorothy wasn't just raising you two with her money. She was making hundreds of thousands selling babies. And you both knew about it. We didn't know anything, my sister lied, but her eyes avoided mine. I pulled out another document. This is a bank statement from Dorothy's account in 1997. Notice the regular deposits. 50,000 here. 100,000 there. And look at the dates. They match perfectly with babies disappearing in 3 different states. I placed more papers on the desk. And these are statements from your accounts. Dennis, you received $20,000 in May 2003, transferred directly from an offshore account linked to Dorothy. For what? To keep quiet about what you saw. Dennis stood abruptly. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. I have 3 witnesses who will place you at St. Mary's hospital in Boston on the night a baby disappeared. You were 19. Dorothy paid you $10,000 to create a distraction while she went into the nursery. I saw the panic in his eyes. It was true. Everything was true. You were just a boy, I continued, my voice softer now. Manipulated by her. But you still made choices. You chose money over doing the right thing. My sister finally spoke, her voice breaking. We had no choice. She threatened to put us in foster homes if we didn't help. Said she'd abandon us like our father abandoned her. We all have choices, I retorted. You could have gone to the police. You could have told me the truth when I grew up. But you didn't. Why? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I already knew. Because the truth would mean losing the little they had. It would mean facing consequences. It would mean admitting they were accomplices. What do you want? Dennis asked, defeated. Want to see us in prison? Is that it? I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to see them suffer as I had. I wanted justice, even vengeance. But looking at them now, all I saw were broken people. People raised by a monster who became smaller versions of that monster. I want the truth. Complete. Everything you know about Dorothy's operation. Names, dates, locations. You're going to sit with my investigators and tell every detail you remember. And if we do that, my sister asked cautiously, then I won't go to the police with the evidence I have against you. You'll live with your conscience, but you won't go to prison. Unless, of course, you refuse to cooperate. Dennis and my sister exchanged glances. They knew they had no choice. Over the next 2 weeks, they told everything. It was nauseating to hear. Dennis had been involved in at least 5 kidnappings, creating distractions or providing information about hospital security where he had worked as a janitor. My sister had helped falsify documents on 3 occasions, using her administrative skills. But what they revealed about Dorothy was even worse. She didn't just steal babies. She kept detailed files on every child, every family, every penny earned. And those files were hidden somewhere. Where? I pressed Dennis. I don't know exactly. But she once mentioned a storage unit in Pittsburgh. Said if anything happened to her, the files would be our insurance policy. Pittsburgh. It took 3 days and 6 investigators, but we finally found it. A storage unit rented under a false name, paid up front for 50 years. Inside, there were 10 boxes of files. When I opened the first box, it felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. There were hundreds of files. Photos of babies. Birth certificates. Receipts. Detailed notes in Dorothy's cursive handwriting. Each file represented a stolen life. A hole left in a family. Years of pain and searching. I started reading. The first file was mine. There were photos of me as a baby, some I had never seen. Notes about my routine, my temperament. And then something that made me stop breathing. It was a letter. Written by Dorothy to herself, dated a week after she kidnapped me. Today I took baby Sterling. He cried on the bus, but no one suspected anything. I looked at that small, perfect face and thought of all that Sterling denied me. Recognition. Family. Love. He will know what it's like to lose something precious. Like I lost. And I will raise this boy as my own, give him everything Sterling never gave me. He will love me. Call me mother. And in this, I will have my revenge. Tears burned my eyes. My entire childhood had been an act of revenge. Every hug, every kind word, every sacrifice she claimed to make for me. It was all part of a sick plan to hurt Sterling. And the cruelest part? For many years, it worked. I loved her. Called her mother. Believed she cared for me. I forced myself to continue reading the other files. Each was more devastating than the last. There were notes about how much she charged for each baby. Some were sold for $50,000. Others for $300,000. And some, like me, were not sold. They were kept as trophies. As tools of revenge. One file in particular caught my attention. A girl kidnapped in 2001 from a family in Vermont. According to Dorothy's notes, the baby had been sold to a couple in California for $200,000. But there was something different about this file. A recent photo. The girl, now 23, was at a college graduation. And in the margin of the photo, Dorothy had written, "She looks so much like her mother. Sometimes I feel remorse." Almost. She almost felt remorse. But not enough to stop. Not enough to fix what she broke. I brought all the files back to New York. My team worked 24 hours a day, cataloging everything, verifying information, locating families. There were 67 cases in total. 67 stolen lives over 23 years. Some cases were impossible to resolve. Families had moved, left the country, or died. Some stolen children were already adults with their own families, happy in their false lives. But for others, there was hope. I began making calls. Sent investigators. Organized DNA tests. One by one, I began reuniting families that had been torn apart decades ago. The most emotional case involved twins. Dorothy had stolen 2 babies from a hospital in New Jersey in 1995. She sold one to a family in Oregon and the other to a family in Texas. Neither twin knew they had a sibling. When I found them, both 29, and told them the truth, they didn't believe it. We did DNA tests. A perfect match. The reunion took place in my office. 2 identical men walked through the door, looked at each other, and froze. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then, simultaneously, they both began to cry. They hugged, these 2 strangers who were genetically identical, and something broke inside me. This was what Sterling wanted. Not revenge. Not punishment. But healing. Reunion. Justice in its purest form. But not all cases had happy endings. There was one woman, 42, who discovered her entire life was a lie. She had been kidnapped at 6 months old. Her adoptive parents had purchased her from Dorothy, knowing it was illegal. When I confronted these adoptive parents, they showed no remorse. "We loved her," the woman said defensively. "We gave her a good life. What else matters?" "What matters," I replied firmly, "is that you stole her right to know her real family." Her biological mother spent 42 years searching. She died last year without ever knowing what happened to her baby. The woman's face went pale, yet she still didn't apologize. Some people, I realized, would never admit they were wrong. Never feel the weight of their actions. But I could ensure they faced consequences. With all the evidence from Dorothy's files, I brought cases to the police. Charges were filed against 17 people involved in the kidnapping network. Dr. Chun was one of the first arrested. He cried during the arrest, saying he only wanted to help infertile couples. No one believed him. Dennis and my sister escaped criminal charges due to their cooperation, but I destroyed them in another way. I used my resources to make their lives extremely uncomfortable. Dennis lost his job when his employer discovered his involvement. My sister was exposed in her community. It wasn't prison, but it was something. 6 months after discovering the files, I organized an event. I invited all the families who had been reunited through my work. 53 people showed up. Parents and children. Siblings. Even some grandparents who never thought they would see their stolen grandchildren. I stood on the stage of the event hall that Sterling used for fundraising and looked at all those faces. Faces that had known unimaginable pain. But now, they also knew reunion and hope. My father, Sterling Rothwell, spent 38 years searching for me, I began. He never gave up. Never stopped believing he would find me. And when he finally did, he gave me more than a fortune. He gave me a purpose. I paused, emotion choking my throat. Dorothy stole me from him. Stole my mother from me. Stole years we will never get back. But she did not steal one thing. She did not steal the ability of love to turn tragedy into hope. I looked at the reunited twins, sitting side by side. At the 32-year-old woman hugging her older brother from Boston. At the dozens of other reunion stories in that room. Each of you represents a victory over darkness. Every hug, every tear of joy, every reconnection is proof that love is stronger than hate. That family is not just blood, but choice. That even in the darkest places, light can still enter. The room erupted in applause. But it wasn't for me. It was for them. For surviving. For reuniting. For choosing love over resentment. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at a framed photo of Sterling and Patricia I had. My real parents. People I barely knew, but who shaped who I was even in their absence. "I hope you're proud," I whispered to the photo. "I hope this is what you wanted." And for the first time since discovering the truth about my life, I felt peace. 1 year after Sterling's death, I was at the cemetery where he and Patricia were buried. It had become a weekly habit. I came here to think, to process, to remind myself why I was doing all of this. I placed fresh flowers on both graves and sat on the grass. The afternoon sun cast long shadows among the tombstones. It was peaceful here, different from the chaos my life had been over the past months. "I found 12 more," I said aloud, as if they could hear me. 12 people who didn't know their true identities. Some reacted well. Others, not so much. I thought of Laura, a 35-year-old woman who had just discovered that her adoptive parents were criminals. She fell into a deep depression, unable to process that her entire life had been built on a crime. I paid for 2 years of intensive therapy for her. It was the least I could do. "Dr. Chen's trial starts next week," I continued. "He's going to get at least 20 years. The others, too." Dennis tried to call me yesterday. I hung up on him. A gentle breeze swayed the trees around. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. "Sometimes I wonder if you'd be proud or disappointed in me, Sterling. I've spent almost $300 million of your money this past year. Investigators, lawyers, therapists, compensation funds for the families. Some would say I'm wasting your fortune. But I knew I wasn't. Every penny spent was bringing justice. Healing wounds that Dorothy had left behind. Doing exactly what Sterling wanted." My phone buzzed. It was Jonathan. I answered. "We have a situation," he said bluntly. "Remember the list of people we couldn't locate? We found one. And she's here in New York." My heart raced. "Who?" "File number 43. Baby stolen in 1998 from a hospital in Philadelphia. According to Dorothy's records, she was sold to an unnamed couple for $150,000. And I found her by chance. She works at a coffee shop 2 blocks from your office. I recognized her from the age progression photos we made. 30 minutes later, I was walking into a small coffee shop in Manhattan. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread filled my nose. A young woman, 26 years old, stood behind the counter, smiling at a customer while making a latte. She had dark, curly hair, bright green eyes, and a dimple on her left cheek. Exactly like the age progression my investigators had created. I waited until she was free and approached. "A black coffee, please." "Sure," she said cheerfully, grabbing a cup. "To go." "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you for a minute. It's important." She looked at me cautiously, her smile fading slightly. "About what?" "About your family. Your real family." The cup nearly slipped from her hand. "Excuse me." I looked around. The coffee shop was almost empty. "Can I sit? It'll take a few minutes to explain." She hesitated, then called another employee to cover the counter. We sat at a table in the corner. I didn't know where to start. How do you tell someone that their entire life is a lie? "My name is Christopher. A year ago, I discovered I was kidnapped as a baby. The woman who raised me wasn't my real mother." She blinked. "Okay. And what does that have to do with me?" "The woman who kidnapped me also kidnapped other children. 67 in total over 23 years. And I have reason to believe you are one of them." The color drained from her face. "This is crazy. I know how it seems. But I have evidence. Documents. Hospital records. And if you agree to a DNA test, I can prove it." She stood abruptly. "I don't know who you are or what you're trying to do, but I need you to leave. Now. Your name is Emily, right? Emily Carter." "How do you know my name?" "Because it's in the files. You were kidnapped from Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia when you were 3 days old. Your biological mother is named Rachel Thompson. She lives in New Jersey and visits the empty grave she made for you every March 23rd, your birthday." Emily sat down again, her breath quickened. No, this can't be true." Your parents, the Carters, did they tell you how they adopted you? Yes. They said it was a private adoption. A pregnant teenager who couldn't raise me. Lies. They paid $150,000 to a criminal named Dorothy. She stole you from a family that desperately wanted you. Tears began to stream down Emily's face. My parents wouldn't do that. They love me. I believe they love you. But love doesn't excuse the crime they committed. You have a mother out there who has been searching for you for 26 years. Don't you think she deserves to know that you're alive? Emily covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I let her process it. I waited in silence while she dealt with the reality breaking around her. Finally, she looked at me with red eyes. What do you want from me? Nothing. I just want to give you the option to know your truth. Take the DNA test. Meet Rachel if you want. Or do nothing and continue your life as it is. The choice is yours. And if I choose to do nothing? Then I respect that. But Rachel deserves to know you're alive. Even if you never meet her, she deserves closure. Emily agreed to take the test. A week later, the results confirmed it. She was Rachel Thompson's daughter. Another stolen life. Another destroyed family. But Emily wasn't ready to meet Rachel. Not yet. She needed time to process, talk to her adoptive parents, decide how to move forward. I respected her time. I gave her my number and said when she was ready, I would facilitate the meeting. 2 months passed. Emily finally called. I'm ready. The reunion took place in a park in Manhattan. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early, nervous, twisting her hands. She had brought a photo album. Photos of Emily as a baby. Of the room she had prepared. Of birthdays celebrated alone. When Emily appeared, walking slowly along the park path, Rachel froze. For a moment, she just looked. Then she began to walk. Then run. The two women met halfway and hugged as if they were drowning and the other was air. Rachel cried so hard she could barely breathe. Emily cried too, holding this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger. I stood at a distance, watching. Jonathan was beside me. Another family reunited, he whispered. One more, I agreed. But my voice was heavy. Because for every family I reunited, there was another that could never be reunited. Mothers dead before seeing their children again. Children who chose never to know their biological families. Cases so old that tracking them was impossible. There was no perfectly happy ending for everyone. And I was learning to accept that. That night, I sat in Sterling's office with all the lights off, staring at the city through the windows. New York sparkled as always, indifferent to the small tragedies and triumphs of the people who lived in it. I thought of Dorothy. Dead for over a year, but her legacy of pain still echoing. I tried to feel anger, but I was too tired. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. She had been so consumed by resentment that she destroyed dozens of lives, including her own. What kind of life is that? Living only for revenge? Stealing babies from their families because you feel robbed? And then I thought of Sterling. A man who could have become bitter too. Who lost everything he loved. But instead of letting the pain destroy him, he transformed it into determination. Into hope. Into love. That's what family truly meant. Not blood. Not biology. But choice. Commitment. Unconditional love. Dorothy never understood that. She thought that kidnapping a Rothwell baby and raising him would give her what she wanted. Recognition. Belonging. But you can't force those things. You can't steal them. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Christopher? It's Emily. I wanted to thank you. For giving me the chance to meet Rachel. For giving me the truth, even though it's painful. How was the meeting? Intense. Strange. Wonderful. She laughed through her tears. She showed me photos of me as a baby. Told me stories about how she chose my name. How she never stopped looking for me. And your parents? The Carters. There was a pause. I'm processing. It's not easy to discover that the people you love most committed a crime to have you. But, they are still my parents. They still love me. It's complicated. Life usually is. Rachel said something today that made me think. She said that for 26 years, she hated the person who took me. Hated so much it consumed her. But now that she's found me, the hate is gone. Only gratitude remains for being alive and healthy. She's a wise woman. You're wise too, Christopher. You could have used Sterling's money for anything. But you chose to use it to fix what was broken. That's rare. After he hung up, I sat in the dark for a while longer, thinking about what Emily said. About choices. About forgiveness. About how we use the resources we have. In the following months, I established something permanent. The Patricia Rothwell Foundation, named after my mother whom I lost. The foundation would be dedicated to finding missing children, reuniting families, and providing support for victims of abduction and trafficking. I donated $500 million as seed money. I hired the best investigators, therapists, and lawyers. I created a hotline where anyone could call with information about missing children. The foundation resolved 17 cases in the first year. 17 families reunited. 17 lives changed forever. I also donated $100 million to homeless shelters across the country. Because I knew what it was like to sleep on a hard bunk, not knowing where your next meal would come from. No one should have to go through that. And I donated another $50 million to mental health programs. Because untreated trauma creates monsters like Dorothy. Creates people so broken they break others. My fortune dropped from $1 billion to about $300 million that first year. Some people thought it was crazy. Jonathan even tried to convince me to slow down. But I couldn't. Every day that passed without action was another day a family suffered. Another day a child lived a lie. Another day justice was delayed. 2 years after Sterling's death, I visited his grave again. But this time, I wasn't alone. I brought 23 people with me. 23 of the stolen children whose families I had helped find. We all stood around the graves of Sterling and Patricia. And together, we told our stories. We told how a man never gave up finding his son. How a woman died of a broken heart. How love transcends even death. Sterling never really knew me, I said to the group. We had only 2 weeks together before he died. But in those 2 weeks, he taught me more about family, love, and purpose than I learned in 38 years. I looked at each face around the graves. We were all stolen. From our families, from our identities, from years we'll never recover. But here we are. Together. Not letting what was taken define who we are. Emily was there, beside Rachel. The twins were there, never separated again. Laura was there, stronger now after months of therapy. All survivors. All choosing life over resentment. Dorothy thought she could steal our future, I continued. But she was wrong. Because the future isn't something you can steal. It's something we build. With our choices. With our love. With our refusal to let tragedy have the last word. We placed flowers on the graves. We said our silent prayers. And then together, we walked from that place of death back to life. This story could have ended differently. I could have become bitter like Dorothy. I could have wasted Sterling's fortune on empty luxuries. I could have used the money to punish instead of heal. But I learned something crucial in those 2 years. Money doesn't buy happiness. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't erase trauma. But money, used wisely, can create opportunities for healing. It can reunite families. It can give a voice to the voiceless. It can transform tragedy into hope. Family isn't who raises you. It's who chooses to love you unconditionally. Identity isn't your name or your story. It's who you choose to be despite everything. And justice isn't revenge. It's ensuring that those who were hurt find peace. That those who did wrong face consequences. That love always triumphs over hate. My name is Christopher Sterling Rothwell. But for 38 years, I didn't know that. I lived a lie. I was stolen. I lost parents I never knew. But I also gained something. A purpose. A chosen family of survivors. And the understanding that even from the cruelest lies, truth can emerge. And from that truth, healing. If you've made it this far in this story, thank you for listening. And if you are going through your own tragedy, your own loss, remember this: what was taken from you does not define you. What you do with what remains, that defines you. Choose love. Choose healing. Choose life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that even in the darkest places, light always finds a way.